presentation. Peter and I met, I guess, almost 2 years ago now when we first started DataStax, and he was one of the only analysts I met that truly got it. And you'll see what I mean as you go through his presentation. But as we talked about in a lot of our sessions, the biggest challenge today isn't the technology, it's the people and the mentality around the technology. And Peter was one of the first ones who I saw had an early grasp of what was really happening, why it mattered, why it was important. You'll also find his beautiful face on Bloomberg television and CNBC and all those news networks. He'll often do spots on there where he's helping to educate the masses on what's happening in our space. So I'm really excited to have him today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter and take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Billy.
All right.
Great, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Peter Goldmacher. I'm a research analyst on the sell side for Cowen & Company. Cowen & Company is an investment bank. I'm not a banker. I'm a research analyst. And a few years ago, I heard this topic called big data. And I'm an ex-Oracle guy. I worked at Oracle for 6 years. And I thought, big data sounds kind of interesting. And it wasn't big data like it is today where everybody sells something big data related. It was a word that people didn't know. And my first introduction to big data was with Godfrey Sullivan at Splunk. And he said, well, you know, every machine that does anything has a log. And in that log is data of how the machine is operating. And what my company does is we look at that kind of data. And I thought, gee, I was at Oracle for 6 years, and we never talked about that. I wonder if this is a new opportunity. So every time I would ask a question, I would get an answer that would beg 10 more questions. So I've spent the last 3 years like this little bee. And this little bee just goes flower to flower, getting little pieces of pollen and spreading pollen. So the presentation I'm going to share with you guys today is a high-level accumulation of my thoughts on the topic of big data that I've gleaned over the last 3 years. And I've been on the sell side now for 14 years, and I can tell you that in my entire time in technology, which is 20 years, I've never seen a space grow and mature as quickly as big data has. And it's tremendously disruptive, and it's tremendously exciting. Big opportunity, but also big costs if you're not truly engaged. I want to hit you with my 3 main conclusions first, and then I'll dig in on each of these conclusions. I've given this presentation at least 50 times. There's a good chance I'll fall asleep up here listening to myself talk, so let's please make it interactive. Please interrupt. Please ask questions, or else it's not that fun for me. So what is big data? Well, big data is not operational data. Operational data is what we traditionally think of as Oracle's domain. I've built an application. It's a traditional application. It's my financials. It's my manufacturing solution. It's my CRM. I know what that data is. I know exactly what it is, and I know exactly how I want to build that database to support that application. That is not big data. Big data is pretty much everything else. When I first started talking about big data 3 years ago, people immediately assumed Oracle, end of story. We're a lot more sophisticated now than we were 3 years ago. Now, concepts like NoSQL, concepts like Hadoop are definitely more mainstream than they were. But it's still not clear to people, when do I use Oracle? When do I use Teradata? When do I use a relational database? When do I use Hadoop? When do I use NoSQL? I don't have the specific answers to all that. I'm a political science major, but I do know that these are the questions that every thoughtful IT executive needs to be asking themselves. One of the really, really interesting things we've seen is all these new data management technologies are open source, and they're not open source replacements of a proprietary code base, like Linux was an open source replacement for Unix. These are all brand new, and there's no proprietary technology they're competing against. These things are all free. You can download them, you can experiment with them, and you only pay for them when you have proven to yourselves that you can add value. So 5 years ago, if you wanted to experiment with some technology, you had to stand up your own, you had to buy hardware, you had to buy databases, you had to buy all this stuff. Now, this stuff is all essentially free because you can download it and run it on Amazon Web Services, tinker to your heart's delight. Maybe you discover something, maybe you don't, but you got to try. And the concept of trying and getting that fast fail at no cost is driving tremendous innovation. These big data projects, and we'll go through some of them. Yeah? I think of operational data and transactional data as overlapping, but there's a lot of transactional data that doesn't necessarily support operations. So if you go to Netflix and you're playing around doing searches, that's not operational, that's transactional. I executed a search, I returned a query, I bought something. The act of buying that is operational. The act of what you bought isn't necessarily, it could be transactional or operational. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, it's all slightly confusing to me too. So my big takeaway after 3 years of being immersed in this is that the real winners aren't necessarily the companies like DataStax or Splunk or Cloudera. They will win. The successful big data infrastructure providers will all be winners, but they're not the big winners because nobody buys technology unless there's a value proposition there that is multiples of the cost of that technology. No one's going to say to Billy, I want to buy $1 million worth of data stacks because I think I can get a $250,000 return. They're saying, I'll spend $1 million with you because I think there's a $10 million return or a $15 million return. So what I think is most important is it's fun to guess which private companies are going to win and which private companies are going to lose, but the stakes are much, much bigger for the Fortune 1000 and the Fortune 5000 and the Fortune 10,000 because these are the companies that could accelerate market share gains and become bigger or lose to up-and-coming challengers. And I'll walk you through some examples a little later in my presentation. If we go back to 1990 and we were all betting on what ERP providers are going to dominate the landscape, you could have picked from 200 different ERP companies, and you probably wouldn't have picked Oracle because Oracle wasn't really in the ERP game then. But if you had invested in the components of the Dow Jones that were all deploying ERP, you would have seen phenomenal gains in efficiency and their ability to grow and their ability to scale and their market cap. So let's dig in a little bit. What is big data? Wikipedia, which has every answer to every question in the world, defines big data as this, and I think that's pretty good. I think that's another way to answer your question, operational versus transactional. This is all, in some sense, transactional, but it's not run your business data, right? It doesn't support your traditional core ERP. From the big data vendor perspective, you've got lots of different guys coming in at a point product solution. So DataStax is a NoSQL solution, and they think about Hadoop, and they think about log data, and they partner, but they're not really providing solutions for that yet. So all these startups are saying, the opportunity is huge, where do we start? From legacy IT perspective, Oracle, IBM, EMC, all these guys, deny, and then when it matters, say, oh yeah, no, we've been doing that for 15 years. And that's all coming true now as you're seeing a lot of EMC and Oracle and IBM and now SAP talking about big data. But one of the things we're seeing, which is really interesting this time, is people are increasingly frustrated by the vendor lock-in. So we've talked about buying stacks from one vendor, and that seemed like a great idea because it was integrated. But the downside of that is once you commit to a vendor, that vendor makes a different kind of commitment back to you, and that commitment is to get as much money out of you as they can and make it as painful as possible for you to leave. And it's amazing, in my 20 years in this business, I've never heard rancor directed at Oracle and SAP like I hear now, yet these companies are still able to grow. So it's a complicated change management exercise. It takes time, but it's definitely happening. Wall Street's perspective never changes. We just want to make money. And the question for the one or two Wall Street people in the room is, how are you going to make money? Are you going to make your rifle shot bets on DataStax and 15 or 20 other promising startups? Or when you go and talk to your companies that you're currently investing in, regardless of whether they're ag companies or consumer goods or retail, the one question you have to ask is, what is your big data strategy? Because if you don't have a big data strategy, you're behind. Taking a step back, how did we get here? I love this chart. I made this chart. In the bottom left corner, that's ENIAC, the world's first computer. They sold about 6 of them. They fit neatly in a warehouse. And there's really only one trend in technology, and we call it by a lot of different names because marketers need things to do. But the trend is, as time passes, price points compress and addressable audiences expand. That is the trend in technology. So you go from ENIAC to the iPhone, maybe you've heard of it. There have been over 1 billion iPhones and iPads sold over the last, I think, 6 years. I read a statistic on Apple. 80% of Apple's revenue comes from products that didn't exist 6 years ago. That's kind of amazing. What's the practical impact of this? Well, as technology gets more affordable, more people buy it, and more data gets created, to the point where the things you do on your iPhone create a tremendous amount of both active and passive data. The active data is, I'm going to go update Facebook, I'm going to go read an article. The passive data is, I've got my location services on, I'm hitting a cell tower, so whether I'm aware of it or not, and we're all aware of it now thanks to the kid in Hong Kong, we are just creating a ton of data. And whether we can debate whether or not that's good or bad, but it's real. And what we have all said is, I will happily trade security for convenience. We've all made that compromise. You have 100% security if you do not engage in the digital world. That's a fact. So the reality is, people are on Facebook, they tweet things, they blog, they're on LinkedIn, and the innovative companies are saying, let me take a look at that data, let me see if there's value in that data, and if there's value in that data, how do I monetize it? So we talked a little bit about this. The database is no longer a product, it's a category. And that's an important distinction. I don't think anybody at DataStax is telling you, get rid of all your Oracle. Well, maybe they're telling you that, but they shouldn't. What they should say is, keep Oracle where Oracle is great, and that's supporting your ERP environment. But for all the things you're using Oracle for, because you didn't have alternatives 5 years ago and 10 years ago, there are now better products at much better prices. And when I talk to Billy and I talk to the guys at Tengen and I talk to the guys at Couch, and they share their progress with me in big picture ways, they're all ahead of their plans. And what they've said is, we are shocked. We never had it in our business plan to replace Oracle in any meaningful way. And we are shocked at how quickly we're getting pulled in to replace Oracle. So it's happening. I don't think it's mainstream yet, but it's definitely going mainstream. We talked a little bit about security. Great media coverage. It's a fun thing to talk about, but we voted and we don't care. I think you can make an argument that we're already seeing hundreds of billions of dollars in big data market cap. How many of you have heard of Google? Right? Nobody? This guy has. Good. All right. So what Google said was, what these guys said was, what would happen if we indexed the internet? That'd be kind of interesting. And if they had tried to do that in an Oracle environment, they probably would have melted down Mountain View, right? I mean, the number of servers and licenses of Oracle you would have had to buy to do this, it couldn't be done. So they basically wrote the spec for now, the core of what's now known as Hadoop. And what they said is, gee, look at all this data. We kind of know what's going on in the internet. How do we make money? Well, we're going to sell search. Facebook. How many of you guys are actively on Facebook? Stop. Don't do it. You want to talk about the NSA tracking your phone records. I promise you the NSA doesn't care that I called my dad to talk about my son's Little League game. Maybe they saw I called my dad and they said, we don't need that guy. When you go on Facebook and you put in your birthday, and you go on Facebook and you friend your mom, who maybe friended her brother, who still uses your mom's maiden name, you're making public data that virtually every bank uses to verify your identity. So Facebook, in my mind, is the Chinese laundry storefront with the gambling den in back. Facebook has said, hey, look, you can be friends with all these guys and you can share pictures and you can reconnect with old girlfriends and you'll be reminded why they're not your current girlfriends. And we think that's great. But really what we're going to do is we're going to market things to you and we're going to sell your data. So Facebook to me is kind of an amazing thing. LinkedIn is Facebook for adults, and LinkedIn, in my mind, is going to be a much, much bigger company than Facebook is, because LinkedIn actually matters. Who's on LinkedIn? Raise your hand if you're on LinkedIn more than you're on Facebook. That should be all of you. Okay. LinkedIn matters, right? We talk a little bit about LinkedIn in the context of, well, maybe I'm looking for a job, or maybe I want to go, I have a meeting with this guy, I don't know, I want to look him up and look at his particulars. But LinkedIn, in my mind, it's basically your internet identity. And the opportunity for LinkedIn to branch out into so many other areas and have your primary internet identity be LinkedIn is huge. So LinkedIn, to me, is one of these big data stories that will evolve over time that I think is probably going to be Google-like in its magnitude and its importance to your everyday life. Amazon. These guys are amazing. How many of you are Amazon Prime customers? Okay. If you are an Amazon Prime customer, there is a very high probability that you're paying more for whatever unit you're buying than someone who is not Prime, because they want to get that person who's not Prime to become Prime. How many of you, knowing this, are going to cancel your Prime subscription? No, you're not. You're not. Nobody does. They know that, right? That's not called a screw job. That's called dynamic pricing. These are the kinds of things. Are you going to cancel your Prime, or are you going to ask a question? Okay.
How many people use two browsers if they're Amazon Prime customers? One that they don't know about.
Outside of Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
None. One. Oh, the question was how many people use two browsers for Amazon, and this is the guy right here who doesn't live in Silicon Valley. Second guy, where are you from? And what's your thought process behind two browsers?
Just back in the research about how they price based on browsers too. Media does that, Argus does that, and then documents from computer too. So just to has to happen. Anything pricing, I go on to browsers.
Yeah. Well, exceptions to every rule. Yeah, it sure does. Yeah. Yes.
How often do you find a pricing difference? 60%.
Really? It's more than that.
It's slight, like with that, but 60% of the time it's slight. Not matter for some people, doesn't matter for some people.
And what are the two browsers that you use?
I basically use Chrome and Firefox.
And which has the higher prices?
It changes all the time. It's not nuanced. It changes all the time. And it's slightly different. Doesn't need. Sometimes it's based on my time to look at it, but it does. It's just for
Right.
buying curiosity's sake.
So the discussion in the room is people using two browsers and getting different results. This is also a big data opportunity, right? Because what a number of vendors who have a web presence have said is, I want to run constant A/B testing. So you can go to the same website looking for the same thing and get two totally different results.
I don't want to start a controversy, but one of your household has a Windows computer. The second test, like on the Windows computer, doing the same test.
Right, because Mac,
For Mac and
Yeah.
Windows, you don't see differences.
yeah.
Not like once in a blue moon, but once in a blue.
Because if you'll pay up for a computer, you'll pay up for anything, right? Yeah. So Intuit, which is actually a stock I cover, one of my favorite companies. How many, quiz for the audience. Intuit sells QuickBooks and a lot of other applications, finance applications for small businesses. Who wants to guess at the dollar volume of revenue that comes through Intuit's applications? Total dollar volume of revenue that comes through Intuit's applications. Ooh, do we have that much money in the world? Let's be a little more modest. 15 trillion. Okay, well that's bigger than the GDP of the US, I think, so it's kind of hard to, I was trying to impress you guys, but I'm only saying 1.7 trillion, so it doesn't.
Peter, you're in a big data audience.
Yeah. Well, 1.7 trillion dollars is. I'm not good with math on my feet, but it's like 500 times more than Larry Ellison has. It's a lot of money. So the opportunity in front of Intuit is, if you're a florist in San Francisco, and you're a florist in San Francisco, and you sell cellophane in San Francisco, and you sell cellophane in San Francisco, Intuit can say, you know, you're a bottom quartile florist in terms of profitability in San Francisco, and part of the reason is you buy cellophane from him, whereas the guy in the top quartile buys from him at a 20% discount. So all of a sudden, Intuit can take that data and not just track it, but add value to your business and help you really run a better business. So it's analytics, where do you rank, and analytics on how do you actually improve that rank. And if they can charge their 5 million QuickBooks customers $10 a month for that service to save you hundreds of dollars, that is an enormous revenue opportunity. That's the kind of opportunity we're on the cusp of. I'll give another Intuit example. It's very hard now in the US for small businesses to get loans. The traditional credit agencies like Experian and your FICO score are still really old, 25-year-old technology. So you go to your bank, you apply for a loan, the bank runs your FICO score and says, no loan. Well, Intuit says, well, we've got 5 years worth of data on this guy. So maybe we'll partner with JP Morgan and say, hey, JP Morgan, you can get a FICO score, but we've actually got data. And we can show you that this florist who wants a loan has actually never missed a bill and has a really good track record of being a responsible small business owner. And JP Morgan says, you know, I'll pay for that data. I'll buy that data from Intuit, because if I can make a loan, even if it's at a lower interest rate, but I have a lower rate of default, that's great business for me. And then Intuit says, you know, we've got that small business data, but we also have 12 million Mint.com customers. Who's a Mint.com customer? Who doesn't know what Mint.com is? Mint is the guy with 2 browsers doesn't know what. Well, you'd never use it, but Mint.com basically aggregates all your bank information so that you can log onto a portal, and I know you probably still go to a teller with cash. Anyway, so Intuit says, if we've got all these potential borrowers over here and we can score that credit, and we've got 12 million Mint users that all have savings accounts getting 20 bips at Citibank, what if I can connect this borrower with this potential lender, totally cut the bank out of the equation, and make small business loans? That is such an enormously disruptive opportunity. It absolutely takes the banks out at the knees for their small business lending, and is potentially an enormous business opportunity for Intuit. We'll see how Intuit evolves into that opportunity, but this is the kind of disruptive change that's happening. And as executives and businesses, this is what you guys need to be thinking about. You know, Adobe, another name I cover, a name I love. As you go on Twitter and as you go on Facebook and as you go on websites and browse and shop, you're creating a gigantic digital footprint. And the opportunity for these marketers is to say, well, who is this person and how does he behave? And if I understand who this person is and how they behave, then I can be more effective selling. So 10 years ago, if I went to a restaurant, I'd run into Billy in the hall and I go, oh my God, I had such a great burrito at this restaurant. And Billy, depending on when he's hearing it and how hungry he is, he may remember it, he may not. But that conversation is ephemeral. I said it, maybe he heard it, maybe he didn't, it's gone. If I go on to Twitter and I tweet, had a great burrito at Mex to Go, which by the way has great burritos if you're in Menlo Park. Twitter catches that. All of a sudden, Mex to Go may become a hashtag. So Mex to Go could potentially start collecting, well, what kind of people like our burritos? Well, it's 43-year-old short guys that like technology, which is my Twitter profile. Doesn't have that, I'm short. And maybe they can market that more effectively, but the point is there's an analog to digital conversion, and things that were ephemeral are now being stored in digital format. They're collectible, they're storable, and they're analyzable. And if you can collect data and analyze data, you can make improvements. There's a company down in San Mateo called Runa, and these guys have algorithms that say when you get a customer to check out, when you get them to fill that shopping cart, we can improve that conversion by 50% by acting on one of a couple things: offering free shipping, offering a discount, or offering a bundle. And what these guys do is they collect all kinds of data. How did you get to this endpoint where you put a product in a shopping cart? Did you go to Google and say, I'm looking for a red Izod long sleeve shirt? Well, let's think about the data that's included in that search. One is, first and foremost, I know where you live. Doesn't matter what browser you use. I know where you live, right? You live in San Francisco, California. You searched on Izod. You're buying brand. You're not price sensitive. So I don't necessarily need to give you a discount. If you live in San Francisco and my warehouse is in Novato, I can get you that product with 2-day shipping, guaranteed, without me as a company being charged for 2-day shipping. So if you're not sensitive on price, maybe you like free shipping and maybe you like free 2-day shipping. So collecting all this data helps this algorithm say, I can convert this customer for you, and I can convert this customer at no incremental cost. You don't have to offer a discount. You don't have to pay for free shipping. So again, just examples of the way we're using all this data to fundamentally change the entire experience. John Deere, they make big green and yellow tractors. I have a friend, I had lunch with him a couple of years ago, and he said, yeah, there's a real problem in the farm equipment space. He has a website that sells used farm equipment. He said there's a glut of 3-year-old harvesters on the market. And I'm not an ag guy, and I said, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I buy a harvester, don't I want to run that thing into the ground? Don't I want to run it as long as I can? And he said, normally you would, but the new harvesters that are coming out are so heavily equipped with sensors and monitors and all these things that are collecting data, it actually costs you money to use an old harvester and not take advantage of the new harvesters, because the new harvesters collect and analyze soil samples. They collect weather data. They collect stalk consistency. And they can tell you, harvest your field at this time in this way to maximize your yield. Oh, and by the way, when you plant your genetically modified Monsanto grains, this grain goes in this acre, this other grain goes in this other acre, because the soil types are different. So the opportunity to improve yield is directly related to data. So again, the point is, everything up to John Deere is a tech company. John Deere is becoming a tech company. One of the things that we're starting to see now is, certainly in my world, we have the applications world, products that automate processes. If you're using a customer relationship management system, you use that system because your bosses want to know what's in your pipeline. I want to manage my business more efficiently. So you have a 12-step pipeline. Where are the customers in your pipeline? What's the revenue associated with that? And how can I forecast for my management team? And there are 20 companies that do that. Salesforce markets its product better than anyone else. So they're the category killer now. But that's only automating a process, and CRM is not that interesting to sales guys. Is anyone here in sales? When you use CRM, is it because you love it, or is it because they've told you have to use it? A necessary evil. If I put data in that application and I automate that process, but I also give you context for that data, there's tremendous value there. You're in CRM. You put in Billy as a sales prospect. Yeah. If you put Billy in, and embedded in that application is your LinkedIn data, and you see that Billy is actually friends with your boss. They go to church together. All of a sudden, that application is adding tremendous value to you, because you can go to your boss and say, hey, I see you and Billy go to the same church. Do you mind making a warm intro for me? So all of a sudden, CRM goes from a necessary evil to something, this is a critical part of my job. So when we talk about data, there are just so many different ways to collect and use and modify that data and make it valuable. And I'm only sharing with you stories I've heard and things that I've experienced. There's never a story I hear for the first time where I can't relate, People tell me stories, and it's immediately understandable. And it's always a question of, why didn't I think of that? So you got to start the ball rolling. It's a collaborative process. You got to talk to people, get out there, mix it up, and ideas will come. The most interesting thing is the technology is way out in front of the use cases. When people first buy big data technology, what they're saying is, I have an existing problem I'm trying to solve. When Intuit first started down this big data journey, they said, we see people coming to our website, and our conversion is terrible. Why do people come and leave? And what they realized was, who uses TurboTax? What they realized was, when you start using TurboTax, if I ask you hard questions up front, the likelihood that you say, nah, screw it, too complicated, I'll go to H&R Block is very high. But what they realized was, if they can bring you in and get you to commit to the product and ask you the harder questions later, if you're 65% of the way done, and then they say, what's your wife's social security number? All of a sudden, it's not too much of a problem to scream downstairs, hey, what's your social, right? So they want that commitment from you. This is like, you needed technology to, like, no kidding. But this is a very obvious solution to a problem that was plaguing them. And their conversion rates are much, much better. One of the things I get most excited about it, you guys all know Splunk. They have a booth here. These guys started out just managing log data. And one of the things we're seeing with Splunk now is they started out in IT, where people's IT guys say, I'm pretty technical, I can use Splunk, I can manage IT operations or security or application performance. Very easy for me to use this. And what's been happening with Splunk and what we're seeing as investors is the people have said, their users have said, gee, you know, this log data is pretty interesting, but I can expand this well beyond my IT environment, and I can start looking at other things. And the use cases are getting very far from their core. They talk about a use case where a real estate company was monitoring elevator data. And the reason they're monitoring elevator data was they were able to glean that businesses that have more elevator traffic are more successful. Traffic in and out of your doors means you're doing better. So when they went to go renegotiate leases, they had a sense of who's doing better and who's not doing as well, and where could they really pound their client for better leases, and where do they need to give a little bit. Pretty interesting. The value of data changes over time. This is a really simple graph, but it makes a very, very important point. The value of a data point is immediate. I need to know what that stock is trading at right now if I want to make a trade. I don't care what that stock is trading at 5 minutes from now. Ideally, I'd like to know what it's going to be trading at in 5 minutes so I can put my trade on now. But the value of that data changes over time. So I get my data point, I used it, I didn't use it, but over time, the value of that aggregate data set is arguably more interesting than just that one data point. So when we think about the opportunity in the transactional world, to your question, in that transactional world, there are technologies that matter. Give me that data point exactly right now. And then over time, we want to say, of all the data points, how do I make sense of those data points? This slide is a little bit of like a commercial intermission from the main presentation, but it's just such a great slide. I wanted to get it in here. So this is Billy's favorite slide. Where's the growth in data? I think we all understand that this line is your traditional operational corporate data. This is Oracle's line, right? This is how Oracle data grows. This is all the new stuff. This is your iPhone data, your data being created by the sensors in your car. So the growth rates are materially different. But what's interesting is, even though operational data grows pretty slowly, the price points keep going up. Your new data is growing tremendously fast, and the price points are materially lower. So again, back to my earlier point, you cannot, we could not be where we are if the Oracles and the IBMs and the Teradatas of the world ruled the roost, right? We're here because this new technology is so cheap. And this is actually very bad for the legacy players because all this is deflationary. You'll never buy enough data. Well, you can try, and I'm sure Billy would like you to. You could never buy enough data stacks to match your Oracle bill. I just don't think you could do it. So it's a good time to be an IT consumer if you're an educated IT consumer. So this goes back to the point I was making earlier, where I'm not as interested in who the winners are in the core infrastructure companies. I'd like Billy to win because he's a nice guy. But the winners are the practitioners. So when we look back to 1990 in ERP, we said, okay, we actually have a chart where we showed all the GIFs of software ERP companies from the 90s. And some of these guys were out of business before you could actually get a JPEG. So we couldn't get as many logos as we wanted. So a lot of these guys went defunct. But if you invested in the people who bought their products, you would have seen expenses as a percentage of revenue decline by 35% on this 21-year period, which is huge. Because you've got scale and you can automate processes, revenues of these companies have grown 5x, largely through M&A, but when you weren't keeping a physical book, a ledger, and you could automate it, companies could get huge. I mean, this is really the rise of the multinational. And the interesting thing is the market value is almost 8 times. So Billy's going to be hopefully a winner, but your companies have the potential to be the really big winners. That's my presentation. Thank you. Happy to take any questions or let you go out and enjoy this fine day. Great. Oh, yep.
So going back to the slide where you mentioned about red color ISO shirt.
Yeah.
So somebody's able to run some permission combination to figure out, okay, if I give him bundle with $10 shipping, he will be interested because he's crazy about ISO. Does that also calculate down to the point where the consumer is smart enough to understand that these guys are going to do this, so why don't I change my searching behavior? And how would that finally lead into all these permission combinations becoming nonsensical and no longer applicable?
So the question is, are consumers going to outsmart the algorithms that companies are making to drive behavior?
Or because these algorithms are being made by humans.
Primarily because what?
Because we are creating those algorithms.
Well, the we creating the algorithms are a very small subset of extremely gifted and bright people. I don't think you need to go any further than games like Farmville to realize that most people aren't that bright. So I'm not all that worried about consumers outsmarting some math genius who is making that connections. And honestly, I'm not sure why I'd want to. Because if you offer me free shipping, if I'm buying iZod and I'm not all that price sensitive and you can get me 2-day shipping, that's great. I'm not interested in saving $5 and getting it in 4 days. So I will never say that business intentions are altruistic, but occasionally business goals and consumer goals intersect. Yeah.
So a lot of what you talked about was kind of driving more revenue. Kind of what the original kind of NoSQL side versus the big data side. You know, the big data side, people tend to think of Hadoop and analytics. NoSQL is kind of, you know, the operational data store and that kind of thing of the app. Are you seeing companies are looking to leverage this to drive down costs rather than drive revenue? Or what's the biggest driver that you've seen, and what do you think is the big driver kind of going forward?
Yeah, initially the experimentation, the question is, are people using big data to drive growth or reduce cost? Right, pretty much, yeah. So it's both. Again, people use these new technologies to solve problems they already have. My problem could be I pay Oracle too much, right? Could I keep track of how people interact with my website in a lower cost database than Oracle? Yes, you can. That drives cost. Once I'm able to do that, and I've collected all that data, and I don't need to spin up a Teradata data warehouse for $15 million, and I can analyze that data in Hadoop for $200,000, am I more willing to say, okay, I've driven down my cost, but this data is cheaper and more accessible. Can I have some smart guys take a look at it and realize what's my opportunity here? I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but still make the point. Is Game of Thrones the big Netflix? Is that, what's the new, what's that? House of Cards. So that's Netflix content, right? Netflix looked at all its data and they said, what do people watch? And they honed in on 3 characteristics, and then they made content based on those 3 characteristics. Again, like, who thought of that? That's pretty smart. We know everybody wants this, so we'll take a crack at it too. So again, I'm using data. I'm using these data management technologies to solve a problem I know I have. But once I get the data, I'm finding new opportunities. House of Cards is a great example of that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I had a question, and it was about trying to get you to predict the future.
Yeah, do that for a living.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm not good at it.
This will be good. We'll get you on record. So what is the analog to the ERP? ERP was automating the process, and
A.
It was it allowed you to take down costs. So what are some of the analogs? I mean, you've given some digital company examples, but what do you see for the global 1000?
Yeah, gee, you know,
Once again.
sorry, repeat. Give me a break. So the question is, if ERP helped the Fortune 1000 reduce costs and eventually drive scale and get much bigger, what are big data technologies going to enable the Fortune 1000 to do? The short answer is I don't know, but they need to be thinking about it, because if they're not, they're going to get disrupted. And the most poignant example I can give you is that Intuit example, where banks, which are banks, are potentially going to get completely disrupted from below by someone else who's connecting people more efficiently than they can. I think about companies like Axiom. You all know the term Silver Fox and Soccer Mom, right? These are profiles of consumer types. These were created by Axiom, Arkansas-based Axiom, and they said, oh, if you want to sell hair gel, go for the Soccer Mom. They care about this stuff. Well, that's 30 profiles for 3 billion people. What companies like Runa say is 30 profiles, we've got 500,000 profiles. And we're going to make, if Axiom doesn't sharpen its tools a little bit, they're going to be gone, because nobody wants 30 profiles. I want to know, you and I, despite the fact you're Canadian, might look very similar to a marketer. Well, probably not you, maybe you and I. Roughly the same age, similar education level. We live in zip codes that imply a certain amount of the same demographic of wealth or whatever. So they'll say, well, these guys clearly are both in the market for Viagra. Well, if they paid attention to my online profile and the way I behave on the internet, and they know I'm a nonstop consumer of porn, and he's not, then they may market products a little bit differently, right? These are known things. Our digital footprint is only getting bigger. So the question is, it's not, I mean, the real question is who's going to get disrupted and from whom? And I would love to know that, because you can make a lot of money if you figure that out. The question is not, is there going to be disruption? There's going to be massive disruption. Massive. Yeah.
How do you communicate the value of big data or NoSQL to someone who really doesn't understand it at all? Do you have kind of a one-sentence thing? Do you come up with an example? What's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, scare tactics always work well. You're going to get smoked if you don't pay attention to this. That's 25 words or less. Honestly, I don't care, because I'm a Wall Street analyst. I bet on winners and losers, so it doesn't matter to me. But what I've realized is you have to get engaged. You just absolutely have to get engaged. And if you don't get engaged, and if you're not engaged yet, you're in trouble, because people are really starting to dig into this. As I said at the outset, I've never seen a trend accelerate faster than big data. 2 years ago, so I wrote a report, 85-page report. I mean, surefire cure from insomnia on big data. Sent it to all my clients, which are investors. Nobody cared. Absolutely nobody cared. And then when companies like Oracle start talking about big data, people said, didn't you write something? And it's going mainstream. So, you use all the big words, paradigm shift, secular opportunity. It just depends on who your audience is. I had the opportunity to present to a bunch of CIOs from Coke and the Coke bottlers. And I gave them a similar presentation to this, which I think is pretty high level and kind of a conversation starter, get your creative juices flowing. And they were all very quiet, and at the very end, I said, does anybody have any questions? And one guy raises his hand and he says, if I buy HANA from SAP, do you think it'll help me get data from my stores faster? I was like, buddy, you're screwed. Yeah.
So do you have any experiences that you could share with us in terms of large corporations, established ones may have kind of organizational inertia to rally behind this. Have you seen within those large corporations certain divisions that have improved their own processes, performance by adopting big data, NoSQL, or anything that you could share?
Yeah, well, what's happening is really interesting. The innovation and the initiative is not coming from IT. It's coming from outside of IT. People are getting successful, and then IT is saying, wait, what did he do? So I'll give you a very simple example. Have you guys all heard of high-frequency trading? Right, the banks all do it to steal your money. That's not done in Oracle, right? That's all done in some data management stuff they've written, other data, open source stuff they've taken and adapted. And then it's the IT guys saying, gee, look at those guys using technology to do something really new and different. And then now IT, banks are some of the more cutting edge users of a lot of this data technology to do a lot of analytics on how do you interact with Citibank Online? What are you spending your money on? I have all that data. What can I do? If I have a way to track where you are, and I see a credit card charge 2,000 miles away, that's probably fraudulent, right? So the old way of checking fraud was very different, right? What are your typical habits? All of a sudden you're buying something in Turkey, maybe you're not in Turkey. So not a great answer, is it? Let me think of it. I think Intuit, coming back to Intuit, because that's just a story I'm very close to. Your experience for you TurboTax users, if you think about TurboTax 2 years ago versus where TurboTax will be next year and the year after that, Intuit is a heavy consumer of Facebook data. Intuit can't say to you, hey, really sorry you got divorced. Like, that's creepy. But what Intuit can say is, when you log into TurboTax, hey, have you had a life-changing event? And they can guide you to a more frictionless experience with TurboTax. So they're, in a way, maybe not disrupting their own business, but improving their own business. Yeah?
Who are the biggest losers?
The biggest losers?
In the big data.
On the technology side or the Fortune 5000 side?
Both.
Yeah. Well,
Who'd you short?
who would I short? On the Fortune 5000 side, my conversation with the guys at Coke, wanting to know about HANA, scared me. Because these are your technology guys, right? Now there are bigger forces at work where the center of gravity is moving out from IT into development and engineering, and hopefully their developers and engineers are a little more with it. Probably too early, because while some people are going to have an early lead, ideas are only as good as execution of those ideas. So I just want to be aware of what's going on. I think the real losers in the technology world are the companies who have built phenomenal businesses on overcharging for what's essentially been a duopoly. SAP, Oracle, Teradata, IBM to a degree. And these guys are all going to really struggle because you've got better products on the market at much lower prices. And I never question Oracle or Teradata or SAP's ability to compete on technology. They spend more on development and engineering than all these startups will generate in revenue. But when the battleground is price, you're cannibalizing your own business, and companies just don't do that. They'll fight to the end and lose rather than make the sacrifices. So I worry about the entrenched legacy vendors. And it's not just data management, right? It's all this software as a service stuff, and it's things like Amazon Web Services. It's a great time to be an IT consumer because your prices are coming down so quickly. And your challenge is, how do I gracefully extricate myself from a 20-year abusive relationship?
That's a great point, Dan. Actually, so anything with the Muppets, Viagra, and porn has to be a great session. So we'll end with that. Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you.